Sure. Yeah, so I have a thought on each. On reach, I'll just say I agree with you, and I think the way that you can streamline that even further or decrease the time requirement is to make reach into a short series of objective yes or no questions. Would this experiment reach over 100,000 users in a month? Yes or no? Is this visible above the fold of the page? Yes or no? So on and so forth. If you can, and it'll be a little bit different for every business or every team, but if you can get that down to 3 or 5 yes or no questions, as opposed to us sitting here and you saying, I think it's a 4, and I think it's a 5, and Trina thinks it's a 3. Oh, are we going to compromise on 4? I don't know. I'm the CMO, so I think I get more weight in this, and I think it's a 4.5. And I side story. Um, there was a team I worked with early in my time at Chrometrics who used Agile for their software development, and during their whatever you call them, sprint planning, the Scrum meetings or whatever, they had this insidious culture where they just could not use the point systems. They had to add adjectives to it. So the developers would be like, "This is a soft 7," or this one's a hard 7," or this one's a difficult 3," or whatever. Just like yeah, totally negating the value of having these like 5 predetermined things, by having 100 possibilities now. So, anyways, that's the thing I try to avoid. In terms of chip betting, the only thing. Oh, okay. um, the only thing I would say on chip betting is to make sure the economy is large enough, right? I think because experiment outcomes are unpredictable and because sometimes there are outlier winners that are really big, right? Those two mathematical properties mean that the biggest cost in experimentation, assuming you can get an efficient process going, is actually the opportunity cost of not running the next experiment. So if you give everyone a finite number of chips, right, and everyone wants to make one big bet, and you end up with maybe 4 or 5 tests on the roadmap that people feel really strongly about, but then what are you going to do next month? You got to repeat the exercise again. um, you may actually be creating some degree of inefficiency. It should be very cheap to run a test. And I mean that both in the real world, right? Like you want to focus on decreasing your cost per experiment with, more efficient development and processes and the right tooling, et cetera. But also it should be very cheap in your chip economy to run a test, right? Like maybe you just need to put a ceiling on the max bet. Like the most you can bet on any test is 4 chips. And that way you're making sure that people are, looking at enough ideas. The other frame to keep in mind that I love is from Amazon, and it's this concept of the institutional yes. And there's a YouTube clip. It's an interview with their CTO. I think his name is Werner Vogels. He talks about the institutional yes, and the concept is anybody who comes to the table with an idea to try, an experiment to run, the default institutional answer is yes, go try it. And if someone wants to make the case that that's a stupid idea and it's not worth trying, the onus is on them to come with evidence to deprioritize the idea. The onus is not on the person who had the idea to prioritize it. So it's kind of like an innocent until proven guilty, or like worthwhile until proven otherwise. Default answer is yes. If you want to take it off the roadmap, you got to have a really strong case for doing so. So that's the other thing I would think about, right? Is like, how do we make